All right, everybody, I've got 7 o'clock on the dot, so we'll go ahead and get started. I think a lot of you may not know me and maybe the first time participating in one of these. My name is Ross Bronson. I'm the Ag Risk Consultant with Red Summit Advisors, and thus I've been tasked with helping out here and making sure that you all get what you need out of this weather webinar. And as always, I want to welcome Brian Bledsoe with us, who's our expert in residence. And so we'll just go through Brian's information and update. And if you have questions along the way, you can put them in the chat or write them down, and you can do it in person. You can ask them yourself, either whichever way works for you. So Brian, I'll turn it over to you.
Very good. Thanks, Ross. And first of all, I'd like to apologize for, yesterday we had some health issues here where I work at the TV station, and companies still have COVID protocol to follow at times. So I was under the encumbrances of that yesterday, but not today. We've got things squared away, and I want to get to some business tonight as far as what we've been seeing and also what we're going to be seeing going forward in terms of our long range forecast here. So the thing that I want to say, first of all, is, what you're looking at here is the precipitation anomalies for the past 30 days. Okay. And we all know that within the weather pattern that we've been dealing with for the past couple of years or so, you can go from one really wet time to just completely shutting things off. And that's exactly what's happened across the western part of the United States, where we really got rolling about the first and second week of December through about mid-January, and then things have just shut off. And you can see some of those precipitation anomalies running anywhere from, say, 3 to almost 7 inches of liquid below average from the west coasts of Oregon and Washington down into California. So as crazy as that, 5 to 6 week period was, it's been just the opposite around here. Now, obviously, we had a lot of surplus coming out of that period of time, but it doesn't take very long for us to dry out. And with the snowpack obviously undergoing some melting, I'm sure that that has reason for some concern. So we're going to continue to address that through the course of this presentation. The other thing that I want to focus on right now, these are current sea surface temperature anomalies. So what the area that I have ovaled out there is called the ENSO region. This is the area that we look at to see if there is a La Nina or an El Nino or neutral conditions. And we still have a La Nina going, but it is rapidly dying. And that's what the blue arrow points to. All that blue shaded water out there are still sea surface temperatures that are technically below average. But what we have going on the west side or the east side of that oval right there where the red arrow is, we have warmer than average water starting to show up off the west coast of South America. And we also have warming taking place up in the Gulf of Alaska and across parts of the North Pacific. Basically, what this map has been showing me now for the past several weeks is that we are transitioning away from the La Nina episode that's been governing us for the past almost 3 years to going to be more neutral conditions and likely going forward, excuse me, into a potential El Nino event during the back part of this year. Now, obviously, at this time of year, we're dealing with oncoming of spring. And so some of our computer models don't do as well this time of year versus when they do others. But I want to show you what that computer model forecast looks like for those sea surface temperatures. And this is the Euro seasonal model for the month of March. And you see the blue going away out there where it was. And you still see yellows and oranges building here across the west coast of South America. You also start to see that really kick into high gear in May. And that's the map that we have going, looking right there. But the other thing that we have going is the North Pacific is warming. So this is the map for May. So I want you to look at that and see that the gray shaded areas there right next to the coast of Alaska, North America, and then the orange shaded areas farther west. Watch these two things change as we go from the month of May into the month of July with this next map. And it really starts to take hold and change where we're starting to see the Pacific warm up by quite a bit. You see in the North Pacific, pretty much a lot of that gray next to North America is eroded. We have full-blown El Nino type conditions starting to materialize here across the ENSO regions of the Pacific. And I will preface these changes by saying, this may be a little fast, but there is a lot of warmer than average water that is pooled up in the Western Pacific, and it's been pooled up there for about the past 2.5 to 3 years. So once this La Nina goes away, many times what that warmer than average water will do is it will slosh back eastward across the Pacific, and that's what helps facilitate the development of an El Nino. So this is the direction that we're headed, not just with this version of your computer model here, but also with something else that we look at in terms of probabilities. Okay, we have all these different models looking at things. You throw the high one out, you throw the low one out, and you get a mean in the middle. And that's what this graphic shows you right here. So over on the left side, you've got that blue bar that's above 60%. Well, that's because January, February, March, that's kind of where we are right now. We're still seeing technically La Nina conditions, but going forward, those probabilities rapidly decrease. You see the gray bars escalate into neutral conditions being the most favorable in March, April, May, even April, May, and June. And then notice the gray bars come down and the red bars go up. That's when El Nino probabilities surge upwards of 60% by the time we head into August, September, October, and September, October, November. So clearly we're on to something here, not just with the current conditions and the changes that are taking place right now, but the computer model information is all over these changes. And even if it were to be a little bit fast or a little bit overmodulated, if you will, initially, I firmly believe that this is the direction that we're heading at some point during 2023. So it may be a little bit sooner than later, maybe a little bit later than sooner. We'll have to see how things evolve over the next couple of months or so. But either way, I believe we are fully transitioning. The next 2 weeks look like this. These are precipitation anomalies being forecast here by one of our more reliable computer models. In the upcoming week or so, we are going to see some increased moisture chances across the Sierras and also across southern portions of California, extending eastward to southern Nevada, southwest Utah, and farther north, those chances are not going to be as great. So northern California on up the coast into Washington and Oregon may not be as beneficial in terms of the moisture versus areas to the south and southeast, as well as across parts of the Rockies there. You see plenty of green, which again isn't gangbusters in terms of anomalies, but it's better than where we've been. And going forward over the next, say, month and a half, this is the overall forecast trend. Now you see where we were for the next 2 weeks with some surplus anomalies there in California. Will we get beyond that? And some of that pattern that's been relatively drier than average kind of creeps back in. And this version of this model comes out on Monday and Thursday. The one that I saw earlier this week had just a complete almost shutout for the next 45 days in terms of dry weather across California. Today's run has cut those dry anomalies back a little bit and increased some moisture chances across the board. We'll have to see how this works out, but I don't think it's going to be just a slam dunk as being drier than average or wetter than average. I think there will be quite a bit of variability in there that we're going to have to monitor going forward. Either way you cut it, I think there will be more variability than there has been over the past, say, 30 days or so. This is the latest North American multi-model ensemble model. It's a precipitation forecast. So what you're looking at is in terms of anomalies and what you need to know. Green and blue, wetter than average. The yellows to the orange and reds, drier than average. And the whites generally average. Okay, so for the month of March, you see what happens right there. There's some dry anomalies across California, southern Nevada, down into the desert Southwest. I also want to say that when these computer models, these long range ones, when they initialize or start their forecast, and there is a La Nina or an El Nino or something governing the pattern, they really latch on to what's governing the pattern and they kind of project that going forward. So why that is important is because if this La Nina goes away sooner than what is being advertised, that may very well end up changing the forecast a little bit. But I know a lot of folks in California and in parts of the West are hoping for that March miracle. And at least as far as this particular model is suggesting, a lot of areas probably aren't going to see that March miracle. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be horrendous, but in terms of dryness, I still think we have some things to overcome. The same thing can be said here in April. Okay, where we've got some slight dry anomalies there right up and down the West Coast. They extend eastward across Nevada, Utah, and through the Four Corners states into the month of April. If we look at May, a lot of that goes away. Now, I know that technically is putting an end to the wet season in California. So it's like, well, it's an average or slightly above average. That may not mean a whole lot. I actually think that could mean something because I think that there will still be some storminess going on across the west and the southwest during the month of May that may help facilitate some active weather a little bit farther to the east. So we're going to have to watch that, see how things play out over the next month or so, if that's going to be reality. But that's kind of what the forecast from this model is looking like for May. For June, again, no tip one way or the other, really. But as I said, the wet season is essentially dry, maybe some slight dry anomalies up the west coast of Oregon and into Washington. But I think the main action for weather starts to shift farther east across parts of California and also into the plains, as I said, with some active weather there. And then what you're seeing here in July, you see that green tongue kind of coming up out of Mexico through Arizona, New Mexico, and into Colorado, even a little bit of southern Utah there. That's the monsoon that would start to set up during that particular time. And the jury is still out on exactly what the monsoon is going to mean for us this year. I've seen this particular model suggest that it's going to be okay. Other models suggest that we may struggle a little bit, but I still think it's too early to say one way or another. Even into August, you don't see any terrible dryness taking place right there across the southwestern part of the United States when the monsoon season should normally be producing some decent rainfall. So if nothing else, this particular model for this version of it this month is not painting a shutout during monsoon season either, and I think that's important. This model is the Euro seasonal model. So again, it's the same color scheme, greens and blues, wet, browns dry, and you can see there for the month of March, it still has some dry anomalies for the southern half of California, southern Nevada, Utah, and eastward across the Four Corner states. It favors areas farther north for better moisture. This is a classic La Nina type look. Okay, so like I said, the model is latched on that there's still La Nina out there, so it's painting what it thinks should actually be there for that time. If this La Nina goes away, then maybe things up being a little bit different. So that's something we'll continue to watch. April, very similar to what the NMME was painting with the dryness across parts of the Intermountain West and across parts of California right there. But once we start going beyond April, notice some changes take place here. You see Northern California ends up wetter than average. A lot of that storminess, I still think may be residual or happen a little bit later this year into the month of May, where we may not get the moisture we necessarily want for March and April, but I don't think May is going to be a complete shutout either in terms of moisture. And you see a lot of moisture starting to show up there in the plains. And I think if you've got moisture showing up in the plains, that means something is coming in from the west and the southwest, which may act to benefit us with a little bit of late season moisture right there in May, which it would be very welcome, especially if March and April aren't exactly what we're wanting there. June, same story. I still think we may have a little bit of action going on in the west to where we may see a little bit of late season moisture going right there. Where we have average, so maybe slightly wetter than average conditions going on across California, Nevada, Utah, and parts of California or Colorado and Wyoming. And then if we look at July, this is the problem that I've seen show up in the model. It actually shuts the monsoon off, or it really doesn't even develop it for July right there. That would be a big problem, because if we have an El Nino coming on and it shuts off the monsoon for whatever reason, El Nino summers are usually pretty hot across the west. You're closer to that warmer than average water that's out there in the Pacific, and it helps facilitate some heat right there. That's a difference in the plains, okay, farther east. But the western part of the United States, the western third, if the El Nino shuts off the monsoon, plan on a hot summer right there. So this is something that I'm really going to watch for in this trend, because this is August's forecast, and it still has the monsoon essentially underperforming during the month of August right there, versus farther east. You see the plains are seeing some very beneficial moisture right there. So that's something that I think is, there's two things that I'm really going to be watching. This transition coming up, not only with the El Nino area, but also the North Pacific, and then seeing how things perform as we go through the next couple of months, because I think that'll be a lot, that'll tell us a lot as far as what may or may not happen going forward with the monsoon season. So in summary here, the La Nina is going away. That's a good thing. The PDO, you hear, I didn't touch a whole lot on this just yet, but the PDO is what I was referencing with the Northern Pacific warming up, and it is still negative. And PDO stands for Pacific Decadal Oscillation, and it has been negative or cold now solidly for the past 3 years without a big bump in it. So because it is becoming less negative, you see I have the December reading at negative 2.21. The January reading almost came up half of that, okay, which is a big jump this time of year. I think that is a very positive thing for the facilitation of the El Nino development, which is likely going to take place later this year. Now, again, it's not a certainty that El Nino happens, but it certainly seems likely, and it doesn't necessarily apply immediate long-term relief. Not only do we need that La Nina to go away, we need an El Nino not to be intense. We need some type of middle of the road El Nino, and then we need the Pacific to continue to warm up. Those things working together really help to facilitate that long-term relief. And by long-term, I'm saying if we can get some late season moisture here, if we can have a good monsoon, and then we roll into fall and winter of next year with the table set to keep for the pattern to actually be somewhat active. That's something that I think is very important. And as always the case, we really need to be vigilant on capitalizing on these wetter times as they move through. Really have that risk management plan honed down to a science and exactly what you want to do. Because as has been the case, when we had that really wet 5 to 6 weeks, then we just shut it off. We really have to be able to capitalize on certain things, capitalize on water usage, what you're going to plant, different variations of what you're going to plant, so on and so forth, going forward. And overall, my take on this is just cautious optimism. All right. And I'm not necessarily an optimist. I'm a realist. And for me to get even a little bit optimistic about these changes that I see taking place, I think is a real good step in the right direction. So if we have any questions about what we've talked about, feel free to fire away.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, you can pipe up or you can put it in the chat kind of to get started. I do have a few questions that were emailed in earlier today for someone who didn't think they were going to make it. So
sure.
The first one of those is will this anomalously wet La Nina winter turn off soon?
Well, I think it already has. I mean, I showed you the precipitation anomalies for the last month, and that's kind of what it did. I mean, we went from just getting blasted with that fire hose of moisture coming in off the Pacific to just completely shutting it off. And as I showed you in those graphics right there, I still think that there's going to be some dry times in there. It doesn't necessarily mean that the next 3 months are going to be drier than average. We just have to see how it plays out. But in terms of it being as wet as it was back in December and the first part of January, I don't think so. No.
Okay. And then the second one was, what direction do you expect the oceanic Nino index to move after it kind of goes neutral?
As I just indicated there, and I know they probably didn't know I was going to be talking about
right.
this.
Yeah.
Time. So, but I expect us to move in the direction of El Nino. But history is such a great teacher. But the last El Nino we had of any consequence was back in 2015. Okay, late 14 through 15, and even in early 16. And that was not a good time for California because the El Nino was too strong. Historically speaking, when there's a strong El Nino, a lot of times it doesn't benefit California or parts of the West with the moisture that it should. So I don't want to see a strong El Nino. I want to see something dialed down that still allows the atmosphere to not get in these stagnant weather regimes where the wet stay wet and the dry stay dry, or vice versa, and you don't budge out of that. I want something that gives the atmosphere a little bit of a bump, but I still want to see that variability in there. So that's what we're looking for.
So, and then one more here, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase this one. So if we move into El Nino, like we're talking about, and we feel like we're really moving into that, and it kind of stays there, which sounds like we're expecting. I guess maybe clarify a little bit about how that will, because it sounded like maybe we were going to do good monsoons, and then the other model said maybe we weren't, but it sounded like maybe you disagreed with that.
Yeah, it's a little split right now.
Okay.
And sometimes El Nino monsoon seasons are exactly that way, so I think before we can say yay or nay on the monsoon, we have to see what kind of El Nino we're dealing with. And I think we'll see that in the next few months. How rapidly do we shift toward an El Nino? And do the models pick up on it being necessarily strong? Once we get that ascertained, then I think we can go back through history and say, well, with this strength of an El Nino, because we don't know how strong it's going to be yet, but with this strength of one, what happened during these years where we saw that type of an El Nino? Did we have a good monsoon? Did we not have one? Was it somewhere middle of the road? We don't know that just yet, but you better believe that's something that I'm watching because, and especially here in my backyard in Colorado, because if we've done really well in much of the state as far as snowpack, and if we have a wet spring, we grow everything up. And then if we don't have a monsoon of any consequence, we dry everything out that we grew up, and we have a real nasty late season of fire.
Yeah.
So those are some things that I'm looking at really all the time. And unfortunately, we just don't know yet. We're just going to have to watch it and then update accordingly.
And as of now, if El Nino materializes, what would be the effect on the next winter?
Depending on the strength, as I said.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
if it's stronger, the tip towards something that's drier may very well be a reality. If it's somewhere middle of the road or weaker, that's when we do better, because those strong El Nino or La Nina events, they are very polarizing with the weather pattern. By that, I'm saying you get locked into these long-term weather regimes that persist for as long as those events last. And that's what really helps to either facilitate drought and keep it that way, or facilitate above average moisture and keep it that way. So once we see kind of how the Pacific is responding with this La Nina going away, and we'll see how soon that El Nino starts to develop, I think that's when we'll have a much better idea. Because again, sometimes this time of year, the models overdo things, because we're going to come up on the seasonal change here, and it takes them a little while to get a grip on what's going on and settle that out. So patience is the best course of action right now.
Yeah, and the more I participate in these with you, the more I realize, 3 to 4 months we're probably pretty good. 4 to 6 months we're maybe, and beyond that, it's really hard to tell.
That's right. Unless you have a real strong signal, like the La Nina episode, we knew that was going to be the thing. So you can latch on to something like that and project it forward. Although the last La Ninas that we've had, we can go back through a string of them that ended up being wetter than average in California. It's like 1 out of 8. So the evidence was very overwhelming that the moisture that we saw in December and January was very out of character for a La Nina episode, especially of this magnitude. So, some years you just get lucky and you actually are able to benefit from it. And this is a good thing.
I got another question here from the chat, and it asks, can you go into temperature predictions?
So the next few months here, I would say, because we're transitioning away from the La Nina, I would anticipate things to warm up across the West. Now, that's especially true if we end up having a drier than average spring, okay? Because we've been colder than average now for the past several months across a large part of the West, and longer range models are starting to pick up on some warming that's going to take place across the West. But that also hinges on how strong this El Nino not only is in magnitude, but how fast it comes on. So that's what I was saying. If we historically speaking, El Ninos will produce warmer than average conditions across the West and the Southwest, simply because that water off the coast, as we start to see the Pacific warm, it warms up and it helps facilitate warmer temperatures. So again, in these particular sessions, there's a reason that I don't show the temperature forecast, because I think in many cases they are highly erroneous, because they don't see cold air anymore. With the tweaks that they've made in a lot of these longer range computer models, they just don't see cold air. So in terms of temperatures, rarely will I ever go beyond 30 days in terms of a temperature forecast, because the model's useless after that.
It's interesting. Does anyone else have some questions? You can ask them directly. You can put them in the chat. I think this is some discussion everybody's been hoping we would hear, and the struggle with El Nino, La Nina is that somebody's happy and somebody's not. It seems, you can't, neither one helps everybody.
That's exactly right. And that's why I caution folks, just like this year's La Nina really bucked the trend as far as what it's used to doing, and El Nino can do the same thing. Rarely do you ever see two El Nino or La Ninas alike and how they position this water in terms of being warmer than average or cooler than average across the Pacific. So it's you can analog it, you can project forward, but inevitably you kind of have to wait and see how the thing evolves when it gets there, and then how the table gets set, and then that allows you to project forward. When you're when you're coming off a 3-year La Nina and you're dealing with a transition, not just in the ENSO region, but across the whole Pacific, there's a lot going on there. And in many cases, it's too much for the models to really accurately predict what's going forward until things kind of settle out and they get a decent signal to latch onto. So as I said, I know everybody wants to know El Nino's coming and all this, but just be cautious about this, okay? Because not every El Nino is a good thing. 2015 was terrible in California in terms of that. So I think we just have to be, pump the brakes a little bit and be cautious.
Yeah, and I appreciate what you said earlier about, making sure your risk management plan's in place and things like that. Anybody who's listened to me or read any of the stuff I've generated knows that I tend to preach conservative long-term decision making, right? So while this gives us some idea of what we might be looking at, really the best course of action is to figure out a system where you can take advantage if it comes, and if it doesn't, you're still going to be okay. You're not hedging, or you're not relying on anything per se.
That's right. And it's tough not to be emotional with this, because we're coming off of this dry stretch, for the off and on for the past few years. And then all of a sudden you get all of this moisture. You get like a year's worth of moisture in 6 weeks. It's tough to say, is this real or not? Well, what have the last 30 days provided? So I know when I was have spoken before, and we were talking back with PRF Insurance back in the fall, and I'm looking at this stuff and I'm like, these months are very polarizing. It's very tough to put together a two dry months in a row or 2 wet months in a row. Usually what has been going on is it's been a really, really wet month or so, and then followed up by some dry times. And that's that when you see that stuff happening, it's really tough to sink your teeth into and say, we know this is where the pattern is going. So you have to, as you said, Ross, be very conservative and very cautious in terms of your approach.
All right. Well, if nobody has any more questions, then we'll let everyone get back to their evening. I know for a lot of folks, it's dinner time or bedtime for kids. So again, thanks for joining us on this first one of the year. We do one of these about quarterly for those of you who are kind of new to our system. And so we'll let you know when the next one's coming up next quarter. And as always, if you have any questions or whatever, get a hold of us, get a hold of your agent, and we can help you get those questions answered. I'm going to do kind of a personal selfish plug in March, I believe 16th. I'm getting to do a webinar for NCBA about kind of what does drought really cost you. Everybody's been talking about drought. We wanted to kind of come at it from a different angle. So if you see that kicking around, get signed up for that and come and join us.
Fantastic.
Thanks again, Brian.
Hey, thank you guys. If you have any questions, just let Ross know and he'll get them to me.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, guys.